Vivian stood at the window of the Texas Star roadside cafe, looking tiredly out at the deserted road. Her 38-year-old face was reflected in the glass, reminding her of years of hard work and dashed hopes. "Vivian, did you fall asleep? Tables don't clean themselves." The sharp voice of Mr. Brown, the cafe owner, brought her back to reality. She slowly turned and picked up a rag. "I'm sorry, Mr. Brown. I'm leaving now." "Think less. Work more," he grumbled as he counted the money in the cash register. "And don't forget to stay late today. Maggie's out sick, so you're working for two." Vivian sighed heavily. "But this is the third extra shift this week." Mr. Brown looked up from the register, his gaze cold. "If you're not happy, you can look for another job. There's a line of applicants outside the door." Vivian bit her lip. She couldn't afford to lose this job, even if it was a grueling one. Her room at the cheap Dawn Motel cost $200 a week, and the owner didn't tolerate late payments. "Hey, beautiful, where's my coffee?" one of the visitors called out. "It's coming," she replied, trying to make her voice sound cheerful. As she poured the coffee, Vivian remembered her past life. She once had a home, a husband named Robert, and dreams of owning her own bakery. But Robert turned out to be a card player who ran up debts in her name and disappeared. Now she's here in a small Texas town, trying to make ends meet. "That's not hot," the customer said without even looking at it. "Get a new one." Vivian nodded and went to the coffee machine. In the mirror behind the counter, she saw her tired face and tried to smile. Despite everything, she didn't want to become as callous and cynical as most people around her. Somewhere deep inside, she still had hope for a better life. "Vivian," Mr. Brown called again. "Don't sleep. We have a lot of work to do." She took a deep breath and returned to her duties. Another long day in an endless series of similar days was just beginning. It was 10 o'clock in the evening. Vivian was wiping down the counter when the bell above the door rang softly. An elderly man dressed in a worn brown raincoat walked into the cafe. His graying hair was tousled and his eyes looked tired but with remnants of their former dignity. The man slowly approached the counter holding a worn leather bag. "Good evening," he said quietly. "Do you have any more soup?" Vivian nodded. "Yes, tomato or chicken. It's $3 a serving." The man took a handful of small coins from his pocket and began counting them with trembling fingers. "My name is Henry. I'll take a tomato, if that's okay." At that moment, the door of the cafe opened abruptly. 3 young men entered, reeking of alcohol. Vivian tensed as she recognized Michael, Mr. Brown's son, and his friends Tony and Pete. "Oh, look who's here!" Michael exclaimed as he spotted Henry. "A local celebrity." Henry shrank back, trying to make himself more invisible. His fingers tightened on the coins. "What, begging again?" Tony came closer, staggering. "Collecting scraps?" Vivian felt her heart start to beat faster. She knew Michael. He liked to bully those who couldn't fight back. "I just want to buy some soup," Henry said quietly, not looking up. "Buy?" Pete laughed. "With these pennies? You're polluting the place with your dirty money." Michael walked up to Henry and pushed him with his shoulder. "This is a respectable place. Not for the likes of you." Vivian stood behind the counter, nervously fingering her towel. She knew it was dangerous to intervene. Michael could easily convince her father to fire her. But when Tony knocked the coins out of Henry's hands, something inside her broke. "That's enough." Her voice sounded unexpectedly firm. "Leave him alone." "What?" Michael turned to her slowly. "Did you say something, Vivian?" "I said that's enough," she said from behind the counter. "He's our client, just like everyone else." "A customer." Michael laughed. "This tramp? Have you forgotten who my father is?" "No, I haven't," Vivian replied, feeling her knees tremble. "But it's not right. He didn't do anything wrong." "Listen to me." Michael moved closer to her. "You will shut up right now and get back behind the counter. Otherwise, you'll be looking for a new job tomorrow." Vivian glanced at Henry, who was kneeling down to pick up the scattered coins. Tears of humiliation stood in his eyes. Something inside her broke completely. "No," she said firmly. "You're the ones who are going to leave now, all three of you." "What did you say?" Michael hissed. "I'm calling the police." Vivian pulled out her phone. "I have their number on speed dial. They'll be here in 3 minutes. Do you think your father will be happy when he finds out that his son is getting into drunken fights in his cafe?" Michael froze. His face was contorted with anger, but fear flashed in his eyes. "You're going to regret this," he said through his teeth. "Let's go, boys." The trio left, slamming the door. Vivian felt her hands shaking. She slowly knelt down next to Henry. "Let me help you," she said softly, gathering up the coins. "Thank you," he whispered. "But now you're going to get in trouble because of me." Vivian stood up and walked to the kitchen. "Don't think about it. I'll bring you some soup in a moment. And you know what? It will be on the house, with bread." When she put a big bowl of hot soup and fresh bread in front of Henry, there were tears in his eyes. But this time, they were different. "Why?" he asked quietly. Vivian smiled. "Because sometimes you just have to do what's right, even if it's hard." Chapter 3. An Unexpected Visit. The clock read 1:30 in the morning. Vivian tiredly counted the cash, trying not to think about the conflict with Michael. Her hands were still shaking a little as she put the tips in her worn cosmetic bag. The night shift was over. She took off her apron and looked around the empty cafe one last time. The silence seemed depressing after the recent events. Turning off the lights, Vivian went outside and checked the lock 3 times, a habit that Mr. Brown had drilled into all employees with threats of dismissal for the slightest negligence. The cold air of late autumn made her wrap herself tighter in her worn sweater. The streets of the small Texas town were almost empty, with only the occasional light from the windows of nightlife establishments. She headed for Tom's convenience store, the only place where she could get decent coffee at this hour. "Good night, Tom," Vivian greeted as she entered the brightly lit shop. The elderly shopkeeper nodded to her from behind the counter. "Late shift again, Viv? You look tired." "Tough day," she sighed, heading for the coffee machine. The shop door opened and the bell rang to announce new customers. Vivian automatically looked around and froze. 2 men in impeccable suits walked into the store, clothes that cost more than her 6-month salary. They contrasted sharply with the shabby interior of the store. Vivian's heart skipped a beat. Debt collectors, was her first thought. She still received letters from Robert's creditors. Or worse, the inspectors Mr. Brown might have called in after today's incident. "Miss Thompson," a taller man called to her as he came closer. His dark suit looked as if it had just stepped out of an expensive boutique window. Vivian felt her palms grow damp. "Yes, it's me. My name is Richard White," the man introduced himself. "And this is my colleague Michael Green. We'd like to talk to you about what happened at the cafe today." Vivian felt her throat tighten. "If you're from Mr. Brown, then I'm—" No, the second man, Green, interrupted her gently. "We have nothing to do with the owner of the cafe." "Then who are you from?" Vivian nervously clutched her paper coffee cup. "Could we talk in a more private setting?" asked White, glancing at Tom, who was watching them curiously. "I don't," Vivian hesitated. "It's late, and I don't. We understand your concern." Green took a business card out of his inside jacket pocket and handed it to her. "We represent White and Green Investments. This is about the elderly man you helped today." Vivian took the business card with trembling fingers. The expensive paper, the gold embossing, everything screamed money and influence. "Henry?" she asked in surprise. "But I don't understand. Why don't we sit down?" White pointed to a small table near the window of the store. "We promise it won't take long." Vivian nodded slowly. Something about the way they held themselves inspired trust, though she couldn't put her finger on it. "Tom," she turned to the store owner. "Of course, Viv," he replied. "I'll be right here if you need me." Vivian sat at the table of the convenience store, feeling her heart pounding in her chest. The light from the street lamp reflected in Richard White's eyes as he pulled a black leather folder out of his briefcase. "Perhaps you recognize this man?" He placed a photograph in front of her. Vivian leaned forward. It was Henry in the picture, but he was completely different. In an expensive suit with neatly combed gray hair, a confident smile on his face. He was standing in front of a huge skyscraper, holding an award. "Is it really him?" she whispered. "Henry Davidson," Michael Green confirmed. "The former CEO and founder of Davidson Electronics." Vivian looked at the photo and the men in confusion. "His wife died in a car accident 3 years ago," White said quietly. "They were together for 40 years. Henry could not recover from this blow." "Taking advantage of his condition," Green continued, his face distorted by a grimace of anger. "The board of directors he appointed himself organized a coup. They forged documents, used his power of attorney, while Henry was in rehab trying to deal with his depression. White clenched his fists. They took everything: his stocks, his house, even his personal accounts. When he left the clinic, he discovered he was bankrupt." Vivian felt her breath catch in her throat. "But this is illegal. Why didn't he go to the police?" "They did it all through offshore companies." Green shook his head. "They used dozens of shell companies. Everything looked legal on paper. Henry, he just disappeared." White pulled out another document. "We were looking for him for 2 years. I was his deputy. Michael was the chief lawyer. We collected evidence, found witnesses, but we couldn't do anything without Henry himself. And today, you protected him," Green said softly. "Why?" Vivian shrugged. "I didn't know who he was. I just couldn't do anything else. They were abusing a defenseless man. That's why we're here." White leaned forward. "What you did showed us that there are still people in this world who do the right thing simply because it's the right thing to do." "But I don't understand." Vivian shook her head. "Why didn't he just tell you where he was? Why was he living like a homeless man?" Green smiled sadly. "After the death of Mary, his wife, Henry changed. He lost faith in people. Maybe he even wanted to punish himself for not being able to save her." "We can give him back everything," White added. "We have all the evidence we need, but we need his consent. And," he was silent for a moment, "we need your help." "My help?" Vivian was surprised. "How can I help?" "He trusts you," Green explained. "You are the only person in these 3 years who has shown him genuine kindness without knowing who he is." "But I just—" "No," White interrupted. "What you did was not just. You risked your job, your well-being to protect a stranger. That is the same humanity that Henry had lost faith in seeing again." Vivian stared silently out the window at the empty night street. Somewhere out there in the cold darkness was Henry, a man who had lost everything, including his faith in people. "What do you want me to do?" she finally asked. "Talk to him," Green asked gently. "Help him to believe that not everyone in this world is motivated by greed, that there are things more important than money." "Like you," White replied, "a man who made the right choice not for profit, but because it was the right thing to do." Vivian took a deep breath. "I'll try, but I can't promise anything. That's all we ask." White handed her a business card. "Here's my personal number. Does Henry come to your cafe often?" "Almost every night," she nodded. "Usually around 10 o'clock. "Good." Green stood up. "We won't interfere. Just talk to him, person to person." After they left, Vivian sat for a long time looking at the photo of Henry smiling and confident. Her coffee had long since gone cold, but she barely noticed. One thought kept running through her mind. How often do we pass by people without even realizing what stories they are hiding behind their tired faces? Vivian stood by the large window of her new apartment. The early morning sun illuminated the small but cozy room. A cup of coffee was steaming on the kitchen table. Not the diluted stuff from the cafe, but real, flavorful coffee. "How are you finding your new place?" Linda, her new co-worker, asked Vivian when she arrived at work. "I still can't believe this is happening to me," Vivian admitted, placing fresh pastries on the cafe counter. "You know," Linda straightened her apron, "when Mr. Davidson told us your story, I thought, finally, someone got what they deserved." Vivian stopped. "Did he tell you much?" "Only that you helped him when he was at his worst." Henry walked into the coffee shop. He looked different now, clean-shaven and wearing a simple but neat suit. His eyes no longer hid that trapped look. "Good morning, ladies," he greeted. "Vivian, how's your business plan coming along?" "I'm almost done with the math," she replied, pouring him a cup of coffee. "But I'm still worried about whether I'll make it." Henry set his cup down. "You know, when I started my business, I only had an idea and $300 in my pocket. But I had something more important, faith in myself. And a wife who believed in you," Vivian added quietly. "Yeah," he looked out the window thoughtfully. "Mary always said that the most important thing is to remain human, no matter how much money you have in your pocket." In the evening, on her way home, Vivian stopped at her old cafe. Through the window, she saw a new waitress tiredly wiping the tables. For a moment, she thought she was seeing herself, the old her. "Hey, Viv," someone called out. It was Rose, her former co-worker. "How are you?" "Good," Vivian smiled. "Very good." "I hear you're a big shot in the office center now." "I just run a coffee shop." "But you know," Vivian thought, "for the first time in a long time I can plan my future." "Is it true that the homeless man turned out to be a millionaire?" Vivian answered. "Just a person who was lost in life, like all of us sometimes." At home, Vivian took a folder from her bag labeled Business Plan. The first page read, "Vivian's Cozy Bakery." She smiled as she remembered how a month ago she was afraid to even dream of owning her own business. Her phone vibrated and she received a message from Henry. "Don't forget about the meeting with the suppliers tomorrow. You can do it." Vivian went to the window. The city was beginning to light up its evening lights. Somewhere out there, among those lights, were people who, like her, felt lost and alone. Perhaps some of them also needed help, not money or services, but just humanity. "Thank you for your support," she wrote back to Henry. "And you know what? I'm really going to make it."